of the
Now,
races next to chat.
Okay, shall we go live then?
Yeah.
Okay. Do this. Just a second to fill in these details.
And apparently people who are not on Facebook can't access it, Gina.
They can, 1 minute. Okay, going live, okay?
Okay.
Just taking a few seconds to load. Okay, so welcome to the show, everybody. It's all about shipping in a different context today. Obviously, due to the situation, everybody is making changes to the life, and we thought that having a virtual panel, just in case you miss going to conferences and panels, would be a good idea. Joining me in today's show is Mrs. Anna Vourgos, Director of Aphentrica Marine Insurance Brokers and the President of WISTA Cyprus, Greg Eason, who is the Editorial Director, owner of Fathom World, writer, editor, producer, broadcaster. Andreas Chrysostomou is the Chief Strategy Officer of Tototheo Maritime and CEO of Marine Fields. Dorothea Ioannou is the Chief Commercial Officer of American P&I Club, and Mr. Alfredo Serrano, who is the owner of Varuna Consulting and National Director of CLIA Spain. So as you can see, we try to bring a quite international panel from all over the world, so you can have a general background of what's going on. Welcome to the show, guys. Thank you for accepting the invite. It's a pleasure to have you live on the show today. And I think there's quite a few going on, quite a few that we can discuss in this show in respect to the maritime sector and, of course, the general impact of the situation of COVID-19. So the first question to all, and feel free to fill in each other, etc., is: do you believe that we're taking this situation seriously enough, or are we just overreacting? Who wants to go first?
I think I'd like to start with that. Okay. Actually, can I do that? Because I think we're taking the situation quite seriously, because I think eventually in society we've got the message across that it may not be ourselves that are at risk, but it's ourselves that pose the risk to others who can be at risk. And I think that is part of the government messaging that's changed over the last month, and that's become quite clear. However, I've begun to see a number of economists that are now questioning, quite subtly, admittedly, but they are questioning whether the reaction that we're now having is worse than the actual problem. In other words, how long we go on with this kind of restrictions and whether that actually creates a worse problem than the actual risk of the coronavirus. But it's an extremely sensitive political discussion at the moment, and I don't think we're likely to see any politicians taking up that discussion anytime soon, and therefore having discussions about, in terms of what we're talking about today, easing the burden on global trade so that we can get some sort of trade flows back to normal.
Andreas, I think.
Yeah, what I was going to say is more or less what Greg just mentioned. I'm not a doctor, although I cannot comment specifically about the virus, but the society had to get a message, which is some of us are vulnerable, some of us are not. And I think by the measures that we took and all the governments around the world they took, that message is now well understood. Now, whether we overreacted in relation to economy, that's another story that we have to have this discussion afterwards. But definitely when it comes to our own situation, to move cargoes around the world or to exchange crews or things like that, we definitely need to have some coherent approach so trade can be happening, because if we do not have trade happening, then we will not have goods moving around. We're not going to have, we will not be able to make things and export things that are needed for other purposes. So overreaction, no, but I think the message is well understood now, and now it's time that the trade can go somehow back to its own understanding and originality. But having said that, again, I'm not expecting that tomorrow all the ships will be running around free of charge or whatever. It would take time, and it would be gradually.
I think, if I may, I have the misfortune of living in a country that has been one of the most earliest impacted and one of the most impacted on this crisis, and specifically the area of Madrid was the first and more, I think, about half of the deaths that happened in Spain, which is, I think, is the second or the third country right now, number of deaths after the United States and China. No, I think we're second now, or well, no, second or third. Is a very, we went through all the process, and I think we went from the beginning. The message was, this is not, it's not something that only, it doesn't really affect you, or it may affect the other people, and we're seeing more and more that it can affect everybody. So, being relatively young is no guarantee for anything. Of course, one thing is when you look at statistics, and it's something that's far away and it's not affecting you, when people that you personally know and you've been working with are dead or in the hospital because of this, it becomes something a lot more, a lot closer. So it's difficult to believe that you're overreacting when this is happening. I cannot say whether we're overreacting. I think the economic versus health discussion is a very valid one. That unfortunately, I think it should have taken place earlier, because I think we probably could have been much more prepared. I think, at least speaking for countries like my own country, but I think it's the same whether they look at the UK, United States. I'm not so familiar how things are being developing in Cyprus. I read somewhere that Greece seems to be doing a good job on containing comparatively with others. So whether that's real good job or that they're going to come later, nobody really knows. But I think that what I feel from in general from authorities, which at the end of the day are the ones who are mostly driving what's happening, is that there seems to be a little bit of panic and chaos. They don't seem to know how to address this, and they just they just decided to shut down the economy because probably that's the safest bet. But of course, probably were they to do a more thorough job and better analysis, they could, they could decide that some areas could be open. It could have been, even if they had to shut down, they could have done it in a more planned way. This is not happening, unfortunately. So I do not necessarily, I can't disagree with the measures that have been taken. I do disagree or can criticize how unprepared governments were, how quickly the decisions were made in general, and the implementation of those measures, at least from a Spanish/Mediterranean West Mediterranean perspective.
Well, I think we were all unprepared, completely taken by surprise for this, because we're reading books about the plague and about the Spanish flu, but somehow, because it's not something which is tangible, I think as humans we feel untouchable in a way, kind of, and where we were focused on wars and actual physical, destruction and loss, we never anticipated that something like this could actually happen outside the movies. And this is where none of us was prepared. And in terms of overreacting, some people were overreacting, some were exaggerating, some were not taking it seriously. I mean, I'm one, when I went to the UK 5 weeks ago, whenever it was, I took it lightly and I was like, oh, you're over-exaggerating, whatever. Within a week, by the time I came back, it was a completely different scenario. Life has taken a different turn for everybody around the world, and all of a sudden it becomes real, it becomes tangible, like Alfredo said. But what has struck me is that all of a sudden, because this crisis is happening, people started forgetting what they know in a way. People are overtaken by panic, and they're like thinking, oh, what are we going to do now? And what am I going to do this? And how am I going to do that? Well, you're going to do it exactly the same way you did it before, but taking a different approach and different measures. And it's a matter of how quickly we were prepared and willing to adapt to the new reality of how we're going to deal with this. Some of it is definitely out of hand. Some of it is maybe under control, but at the end of the day, we're not really, in my view, we're not really going to know until it's the end of it, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what everybody is saying. But I want to add that I don't envy any of the world's leaders right now. These are all extremely difficult questions that are being posed. There are conflicting theories. Every day I read, opposing articles. I don't really know what to believe. I don't have any answers. I believe we're taking it seriously, but I also believe that there has to be a serious discussion about how we're going to come back, because the timelines that we're seeing are kind of remarkable. And I do believe that there is a possibility that some of the repercussions could be longer term worse. So, and I'm not an expert, and I definitely don't have the answers. I just have a lot of questions. I also have the aspect that, I happen to have been in Greece when this happened, and our company made a decision for me to stay here. I also have a daughter here, so okay, that was definitely a personal decision as well. But I'm normally based in New York, and what's going on in New York is terrifying, and it's very upsetting. I have a brother who is also he's a physician, and he's in a hospital in Long Island, and the stories that I am hearing are not very good stories, because the difference in this case, in this outbreak, as compared to anything in the past besides the scale, is that people are alone. And now in any hospital, if you get sick, it doesn't matter whether you're going to the hospital for COVID or something else, you're going alone. And that is taking a toll also on our people that are in the hospitals and working. So, I mean, definitely we're taking it seriously. I don't think we're overreacting, but as Andreas said, I think some of the rest of the team here said, there needs to be a discussion about what is the next step. It can't just be lockdown indefinitely. There has to be a plan. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be destroyed economically, and that could be a death sentence as well. And will the world and the economy, or each individual economy, be able to reabsorb these individuals? We're going to see crime rate increase if people don't have an ability to make a living. We're all blessed in the shipping industry. Let's be real about this. We can do our jobs from our homes. There are a lot of people that cannot do their jobs from their homes. What about all of us that had help, that with people that help us in our homes, that help us with our children, that help us with things? They're not. Are we paying them? Are we continuing to take money out of our pocket to pay them while they sit at home because they can't do their jobs? There needs to be a plan. These are some of my concerns long term. I don't have any answers.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I believe that going later on into the show, we can also touch upon some suggestions or input from everybody's side on going forward, how you perceive this, obviously within our scope and within our sector. I think the next question we'll be having now discussed a more general and wider concept of this impact. On a personal level, you all have very diverse kind of backgrounds. We're all in the maritime industry, obviously. But what has, in your environment, how have you been feeling or embracing this situation? What has been the impact personally, professionally?
From my point of view, it's as a journalist and working in the media, there's a lot of sometimes conflicting messages and stories. We've touched on that already in terms of how we perceive and the perception of the pandemic. But within the shipping industry specifically, as that's an area that I focus on, and shipping and maritime ocean space, I think there is a feeling of fear. I mean, Dorothea, you mentioned that we're lucky we can all work from home. Well, of course, seafarers can't. They're working on the ships, and they have got that challenge of getting on and off the ships. And then if they're on or off the ships, they've got the challenge of then getting home. And then already, and this is the bit that I saw, already we see companies using the pandemic and the response to the pandemic to start making economic changes. There are companies laying up ships already. There are companies threatening to make people redundant. There was a satellite company, OneWeb, that filed for bankruptcy protection in the US only a week ago, citing the impact of the pandemic on its ability to raise capital to help it fund its launches, I believe. So there's already been a lot of economic responses within the shipping industry to this. And I think that is slightly, for me, that's somewhat alarming, because they seem to be, a lot of companies seem to be reacting very quickly and very negatively to what's going on. Now, I don't know, it's not my job to say whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing here, but it's just noticeable how quickly some companies have been to start making changes to their normal working practices or the normal business endeavors.
Andreas?
In essence, I mean, if you look at it from a personal level, I'm a person that I always like to go to the office. I'm a person that likes to have its own working environment, its home environment. But because I'm in shipping, I know how to work from home. And of course, I can do my job at least 80 to 90% as I am in the office. What I'm seeing happening now is that in general, not in shipping, people are learning how to work from home and distancing themselves from the community called the office. Now, whether that will be something that we will see changes in the society later on, let's see. I was reading an article today talking about big corporations. They will be making smaller spaces, having less people in the office. They use most of the people by remote. Okay, but that's more social than anything else. But when it comes to shipping, we have to say it's a vulnerable industry. And I agree, Greg just mentioned where they're taking actions very quickly, some others they don't, but it all depends which sector you are and what kind of shipping you're doing, and immediately that will have an effect. I mean, we see the sister industry called aviation, they instantly got affected. I mean, this is the 11 September repeating itself or not, or even worse. I mean, I was reading from British Airways today on an email that came to customers there. It's the second time ever in the world that they stopped their planes, and that was the first time was during the Second World War. So, and there are some sectors in our industry will be hit very quickly. I mean, we read continuously in the news about empty containers waiting to be transferred, demurrages coming out. So some people might not make it, some people they will make it. What is important, though, as I said before, the effect of not moving shipping, it will end up to the end user. If you don't move the goods around, we are not going to have what we need. So one of the things that we have to very quickly discuss is how we move the goods. So how the consumer at the end of the day receives the things he or she wants from the supermarket, the drugstore, and so on and so on. Especially for Cyprus, for example, that have books and don't produce more outcome. How are we going to survive?
Andreas, I think we're losing your audio.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There was
okay, so, but anyway, my conclusion is that we need to find the right balance. We need to find the right balance, and that should be start discussing that very quickly.
True. Anna?
Well, from a personal point of view, I mean, as we were chatting earlier before the live streaming, I had the luxury, because it is a luxury these days, to not be isolated alone. So I'm here with my son, and I am not alone, and therefore I'm not jumping up and down, you know, hitting my head on the roof week after week. I also got my first opportunity ever in 23 years to be a stay-home mom, and see how that is. And in all that, you know, sadness that surrounds us, my son got his mum at home for the first time for over 3 days and not on a holiday. At the same time, I'm imagining how hard it is for mothers, and I'm speaking as WISTA now, as a woman and, you know, as president of WISTA, how difficult it is for the mothers of young children to be able to work from home when they've got their kids at home and they've got to do the online schooling at home, because this is something that is affecting society, but it does come back to us in terms of how effective are we working from home. Yes, we can be geared up, and then yes, we have the technology, but when you have 2 young children, how effective can you be when you still need to do their schooling and supervise them when they do their schooling at the same time? Whereas when you're in your office, someone else is doing that job for you. Professionally now, for us, it was a completely unprecedented situation, because for the first time ever, the insurance market has completely shut down and is working from home internationally. I mean, the London market, taking Lloyd's, for example, they closed for the first time in history in 340 something years since their establishment. They didn't even close during the World War bombs. So this puts everything into perspective of how serious this is today. But 4 weeks ago, none of us was really taking it seriously. So in a market that for 350 years has worked on a personal face-to-face and interacted on a face-to-face daily, thousands of people, professionals in the city have been doing their jobs face-to-face. All of a sudden you find yourself having to do it through a computer or a screen, and it's changing completely, because nobody predicted that something would ever happen like that. And it has taken us a good 2 weeks, all of us, to actually adapt to this new reality and find a way of carrying out our business remotely, all of us, not just us being retail here, me running an office of 9-10 people and managing them to work. But can you imagine running a huge organization of 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 5,000 people, and trying to get them to work and do everything to the best possible way? Because yes, all this is happening around us, and in the bigger scheme of things, we still need to all look at our smaller worlds and concentrate on how to be efficient within our smaller world called shipping and our even smaller world called insurance, on how to help to the best possible level that we can our clients to go through this difficult, challenging time. I mean, P&I clubs, and Dorothea is going to talk about that, I'm sure, they're better geared to work remotely because, you know, they are the ones that have to respond 24 hours a day. So their staff are more geared, more prepared to work like that. But the whole market has, and I'm sure like the reinsurance market, property market, everybody who was used to working on a face-to-face basis from 9 to 5 every day in the city, they woke up to a completely new reality, completely unprepared. But I have to say, it's only taken a couple of weeks for them to adapt and adjust. So we are pretty close to the norm. It's just a bit more challenging, and it takes a longer time to do something that we were previously able to do, you know, say within the hour or something.
I think also, yeah, can I just add something there to what Anna said? Because just going back to what you said a couple of minutes ago, relating to WISTA and this working from home environment, because we've got everybody now forced to understand that working from home with the kids' environment, I think that's going to make that whole argument a lot easier to be understood in the future. I think when we look at how we're all responding and using this modern technology, which when we had the 2003 SARS and the economic crash in 2008, we didn't have this level of technology that we've got today, this level of communication, broadband, 5G, etc. We never had that. So I don't think, you know, in 2003, we would have been able to achieve what we're achieving now through technology. And nor, I also think that the whole social sphere, this whole gender diversity discussion has driven things on to a point now that when we come out of this, that discussion about being able to work from home and having kids is going to be seen as completely normal now. not embarrassing to having kids screaming in the background. I think it's just people are just totally accept that.
Yeah, I wanted to add actually now what's I find interesting is in our office meetings that we do now, we have this whole system of cross-departmental, cross-office, cross-functional video meetings that we do globally, because we have offices in every single time zone. And I see the ladies, the mothers have the children on their laps, and so do the men right now. So I think that's also a big change right now, because if you've got two people in the household and you have, children, it's not necessarily always going to be on the woman's hands. So I've seen the fathers also managing with the kids screaming on their laps. I tend to get a little bit tough with that, and I tell them, okay, make a schedule, and switch off the kids between you so that I can have the hour on the video. But okay, mine's 20 now, so I guess I've lost my sensitivities. But I wanted to say that for me, on a personal level, obviously I ended up getting stuck in Greece, while as normally I now live in New York for the last couple of years. I feel lucky that happened to me. Number one, because things are better in Greece than they are in New York. And number two, though, like Anna, I get to be with my daughter. So that makes things nicer. The downside to this whole remote thing, though, is that, or working from home, is that I work more now. So my role now is I oversee the Asia, Europe, and UK business continuity operations. And then I act as the conduit, as a decision maker with New York. So that means that I don't do it every day, but some days I may wake up at 5:45 in the morning to connect with Asia. Then I'll go back to sleep for a couple of hours. Then I wake up to connect with Greece. Then I connect with London. And then from 3 o'clock onwards, I'm connected with New York. And sometimes those meetings, because there's so many different departmental and cross-functional aspects that we're managing remotely, I may not finish until almost midnight. Now, I always traveled. I always worked a lot, but not like this. So, personal, professional sort of impact is significant. I'm tired more than I was before. But it is interesting. What I do love about it, though, is that now, whereas in the past, the decision makers or general decision making might have taken 2 to 3 days or even a week sometimes on.
Has Greece frozen?
Yes, it seems that.
Yeah, slightly.
Okay, she will come back, I guess.
Maybe Alfredo, if you want to share your input until Dorothea is able to be back online.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think from my side, and let's speak first, on a personal level. I think of course, we are part of an international association, so we do have we were already doing a lot of video conferencing and working remotely. That was always part of my work. But of course, the fact that it's exclusively now since already almost a month, that's kind of new. I think, one of the things that I felt that on top of everything that's been discussed, which of course I share, was I think within the organization, I feel like even though the industry is facing a challenge like it's never been faced, I think very few sectors are under, the pressure that the cruise industry is. I mean, it's getting zero revenue right now, zero. So that's very difficult to imagine such a huge fixed cost and zero revenue. But in spite of that, I think, I have the feeling that people within the organization are coming together. You see people who, instead of, complaining, are, trying to find the positive, see how they can help each other. And I also feel that, these video conferences that we have are always much more positive. I think people, I don't know, I have the feeling that people are more ready to joke a little bit more, to smile a little bit more, to argue a little bit less, I guess I think people want to, they want to share what's positive and put their best face under this crisis, because there's not much we can do, unfortunately, other than keep on working. So that's my take on what's going on.
That's a very positive note. I don't know if Dorothea is able to.
The internet has got a problem. She's just texted me.
Okay. You all touched on very important points, each obviously from a different perspective, and actually we could probably have an hour's show on the gender diversity issue and working from home in general, and this new kind of unity that Alfredo mentioned in the cruising section, what he's seeing, which is quite important. But we've already kind of discussed what the impact has been so far, and have touched upon what will be the future, etc. I would like if you could kind of share, obviously we don't know, there's great uncertainty and nobody is able to know exactly how we are going forward in this situation, but what do you believe will continue going differently, either in a mindset or in the way of working, each again in your individual field of expertise, on commercial shipping, trade in general, seafarers, the supply of seafarers, port restrictions?
Well, can I touch on the seafarers just briefly here, because there's been within our industry, I've seen a lot of discussion on social media about, and there's been a lot of emphasis on the well-being, on the welfare of seafarers from a number of charities and organisations at the moment, and it's now becoming a major topic within the IMO, who have come up with discussions and talking to port state authorities to try and ensure that seafarers are seen as a key element of the workforce, so that we can continue world trade going. But of course, to be able to take a seafarer off of a vessel, you need to be able to put a seafarer onto the ship. You can't just take them all off of the ship. You want to put them onto the ship, and you need to have the transports to get them from their home countries, Philippines, China, India, wherever, but these countries are in lockdown. So are those countries going to be part of this discussion to enable seafarers to travel internationally with quarantine restrictions in place, I believe, for 14 days. So a seafarer, it would take them 14 days before they actually join a ship, having to go through quarantine, to relieve a seafarer that then has to go into quarantine for 14 days, despite the fact that they've been on a ship for a number of months, and you could argue that that is a form of quarantine in itself, but that's by the by. So that discussion, I think, I'm quite impressed by how that discussion, the maturity of that discussion over the last week, even last few days. This last week, we've seen a lot of discussion, a lot of effort. I've seen crowdsourced efforts to get funds to seafarers that are stranded and unable to get home. They don't have the money to pay for food. They can't get out and buy anything. They're stuck in countries like, I think there's some stuck in Spain. There's some Indian seafarers in Iran. There's been a number of stories about seafarers and videos to sort of authenticate that, of seafarers stranded, unable to, they're stuck in seafarer centres without any funds. So the response to that, I think, is heartwarming, worrying on one level, but still heartwarming. But also it's good because we're actually enabling that discussion about the role of the seafarers in world trade to reach a new level. We're actually raising that discussion about how important it is to have the right people on the ships. Because if we don't have the ships, then we don't have the... Now, if we get this wrong, that message could percolate down to the younger generation, who will go, well, why would I want to go onto a ship as a career? Because I'm just going to get stranded next time there's some sort of crisis, and I'm not going to be treated with respect. So I'm glad to see that we're getting this message across, but I'm fearful that if we don't get it across well enough, that the next generation of seafarers, even those ones in college, may think, no, I'm not going to pursue a career at sea because I don't like the way that I appear to be getting treated. And on a final point, to something that I wrote a couple of weeks ago, is if you want to talk about isolation and self-isolation kind of thing, behave like a seafarer. They're stuck on a ship doing 4 on 8 off, 4 on 8 off for months on end, 7 days a week. They can't leave their house for a lot of the time. They can't go anywhere. They can go up to the top room and they can go down into the basement of their home. That's the most they can do. And then we're now expecting them to stay on board for longer. So if people are worrying about 2 weeks of self-containment, think about the seafarers that have done 4, 6, 8 months of kind of self-containment in a way, and then we're now asking them to do another month or 2 on top of that because everything's shut down and they can't get a relief.
That's definitely a very valid point, and especially I believe in the argument and debate on going forward with seafarers and attracting them to the industry. We've already been having issues. But before I allow everybody else, because Dorothea is back online, she had some technical issues. If she can just finish what she was saying to the previous question.
Yes.
We'll get back.
Sorry about that. Greek internet. No, I just I actually want to follow on what was just discussed, but just to finish that thought before, one of the things that we're finding is that within our organization is that decisions are made much faster. Because everybody is accessible. All decision makers are immediately accessible at any time. You know, despite time zones, despite the situation. So if there's an issue in Asia in the morning, by midnight Greek time, it's resolved. Decisions are made within a day because there's just immediate access. That didn't exist before. I would like to comment on what was just discussed. Definitely the role of the seafarers and their plight is on the forefront also for P&I clubs. As everybody knows, the P&I clubs also, you know, in recent history took on the responsibility under MLC convention to deal with as everybody knows, P&I clubs. Sorry, I have an echo now. To deal with stranded seafarers, we actually have a ship right now that has been abandoned, and the usual rules are that the wages that the clubs pay, of course, they pay them on a without prejudice basis, but they pay them in order to facilitate and help the seafarers. They pay them usually on condition that the seafarers are being repatriated. They pay for up to, I think it's 3 or 4 months now, I can't recall. But in this case, they can't be repatriated. So they are stranded. This abandoned ship, the seafarers are stranded. So, you know, we've had to take a different approach and make part payments in order to help their families that are getting no income right now. So these things are definitely on the forefront. All of the clubs have been spending a lot of time within their loss prevention departments, also creating awareness for mental health for a long time now, but this just brings it up even to a greater extent. So definitely, I think that the maritime industry is doing what's right now.
Okay. Anna, do you want to, because your background and experiences with Dorothea are very interlinked, so maybe you want to follow up on that before we go into
I just wanted to add something on both on what both Craig and Dorothea have mentioned about the seafarers, because through my chamber hat, we've also been involved, you know, with the discussions with the ICS and the discussions of the ICS with the IMO in all the efforts that are being made, because obviously suggestions and proposals are being put on the table. It's a huge project to undertake to try and repatriate the seafarers. There is the will and there are ways, and we can find the ways, but unless the governments open the borders, there's no way you can just sort of you know, have one aeroplane chartered to take 2 seafarers, for instance. It's a very big project, and I don't know how we're going to pull it through by the time the restrictions are over. But irrespective, priority, I think, is given at all levels, and I believe Dorothea is going to confirm that, is with the crew members at the moment in various ports or at sea who may have an injury or a different illness, and they need immediate assistance. And they may not have the luxury of time to go through all the COVID measures, restrictions that each port has. And this is where, at least we have been finding from you know, some of our cases where we are struggling in situations where we need assistance, immediate assistance, and we have to go through that whole process of ensuring it's not COVID, or making sure, you know, if it's COVID, it's something else. And then the ship gets delayed. And at the end of the day, all this domino or snowfall, it comes down to who is going to pick up the bill. how are we going to apportion the bill at the end of the day? And I can't remember who mentioned this, but it's going to be a united effort in terms of who's going to pick up the economic loss out of all this, because definitely the shipping industry can't pick it up on its own. Insurance industry definitely cannot pick it up on its own. And therefore the governments cannot pick them up on their own. So therefore it's going to be a joint effort on how we're going to deal with this, and if we can all give way to certain things and find a happy medium, if there is such a thing as a happy medium under these circumstances. That's something that we have to think about, what's going to happen afterwards, what's going to happen next.
Alfredo, from the cruising side of it, it's also quite a phenomenal situation. For one, all of the cruise ships are in layup, as you mentioned earlier. You did note something positive in that everybody's trying to work together in this respect to find a solution. But it is a very unprecedented time. What do you believe that we'll be able to recover? How would this impact be evolve?
Well, I think that's a million. Well, it's more than a million. It's like the many billion-dollar question is what's going to happen with the industry. I think when in situations like this, when there's a lot of noise and there's not a lot of visibility, I'm not sure we're at the bottom of the situation to know that we're going to bounce back. There's some encouraging signs. Seems like China is slowly picking up again. It seems like some European source markets start to give signs, very preliminary signs, of being woken again, like Germany and some northern European countries. Still very, very preliminary. Maybe it's wishful thinking from our side. But when situations like this, I think the only thing you can do is to take a step back and think about the fundamentals about the industry. And we're talking about an industry that before this situation was extremely profitable, strong cash flow generator. So let's say the fundamentals, the economic fundamentals of the industry were right. I think even though obviously this crisis may change people's behavior towards being in a place surrounded by a lot of people, especially in the short term, especially for the older people who are a significant percentage of the cruise industry guests. But in spite of that, there's a lot of people who love cruising, who like the product, who enjoy it very much. And I think that's going to remain. And finally, I think the assets are going to stay there. I think the ships are going to stay there. So obviously there's some concern about whether some of the companies may survive. I think they all will. And I wish they all will, but obviously it's very much contingent on how long this situation lasts. But even if, God forbid, that were to happen, it's happened before. There have been other crises, not as bad as this one, but there's been other crises. Some players disappeared, new players came, started to operate the assets, and in a few years, the industry was back on its feet. So I think if it was something else that people no longer wanted to cruise, or there was something that was making it impossible to make a profit, then I would have a concern about the survival of the industry. I think none of those things are at stake, but it's totally unprecedented. It's never been something like that. So I of course, operators are under a lot of stress. And I think the other thing that we should not forget, which is especially critical in the case of the cruise industry, is that, of course, the cruise industry is not just the ship owners and the cruise operators. There's a whole community, an ecosystem that revolves around it, from port agents to DMCs, so the people who operate the excursions, to the suppliers, of course, the insurance companies, the brokers, the consultants, travel agents, airlines. There's a lot of people. In some cases, they're really small and middle-sized company who may not be around, and especially if there's no liquidity, if there's no activity, they don't have access to financing like the big ship owners do. So are they going to stay around in business? And if they don't, how a cruise line is going to be able to operate in certain destinations if you don't have that. And I think perhaps the other big concern is that cruising, as opposed to other types of tourism, requires not just one destination to be open for business and for tourism. It requires, 4 or 5 or 6 destinations. You need at least 4 or 5 or 6 different destinations to be ready to take on tourists under more or less the same conditions before you can have an itinerary, you can have a cruise. And that's why, it's one of my biggest criticism of how the shutdown of the cruise activity, or in general, the economic activity, has happened in the different countries, even similar countries like the ones in Southern Europe, is that every country has done it at a different time, using different criteria, and not really learning from each other or trying to take an organized or a coordinated way. So, what's the benefit if tomorrow, let's say, Italy opens up for the cruise industry, and Spain, Italy, Croatia, and Greece don't do it? You will not be able to build an itinerary just out of Italy visiting Italian ports. So it's going to take time. There's a lot of challenges. It's very hard to know what's going to happen. But in this situation, the only thing we can do is, as I said at the beginning, go back to the fundamentals. And this is a sound industry with a very attractive product that has been very profitable for a long time. So I think, and the assets will remain. So based on that, I'm confident that the industry will be back on its feet sooner than later.
Good, and it's good note. And Andreas, would you like to also share some thoughts? You're mainly involved in the connectivity sector, but I'm sure you've got more than that to share with us.
Yeah, I will start with Craig when he said we talk about the seafarers very rightly and very correctly put the situation into place, and I totally agree with him. We have to get it right to send the correct social message. We don't want the new generation of seafarers abandoning school, going to seafaring simply because there will be a stigma wrongly translated. And I think the actions be taken are okay, but I still don't understand how we want the ships to move, but still we cannot accept crew changes in an easy way. We cannot find an easy way. I agree with the European Union's proposed decisions, which it considers them as vital workers now between the border of Schengen, but Schengen and the rest of us is not the whole world. So we need some action from all of them. Now, the most important thing that we're missing in this discussion is connectivity. Greg is right that the seafarer on board the ship is confined in a specific environment, but it doesn't usually do social distancing. They will go to the crew mess. They will go to have dinner with the other colleagues at a certain time. In essence, now, if we all follow the guidelines that is going around, is social distancing. You don't talk to anybody. You have to keep a distance of 2 meters, etc., etc. So again, we impose even to them a completely different and new environment. And they're far away from their families. They don't know when they're going to see their families. And of course, connectivity, the technology, and very rightly we said it before, the new technologies we have now are much better than the SARS epidemic we had years ago. And therefore, we have to keep them connected, and we have to try to provide that connectivity. I mean, from our side, for example, companies like Tototheo, we provided as much as we can and try to provide seamlessly that service. And of course, Immersed and the rest of them, they're doing their business together, and we are very lucky that we have this technology. I have to say, though, that everybody might say that the shipping industry did not really embrace technology very much, but as we see today, there is a truth and not truth in that argument, because everybody is trying to work. We hear from all of us that we're working. I know all ships are working, even if they're laid up and they have connection with the internet. Therefore, they took very early decisions now that to embrace more technology, or they were embracing it, we didn't know. But what I see with technology is things would change. More and more people will embrace technology in many different ways now. And I will see the argument of the autonomous ships progressing faster than it used to be progressing up to now. Because we could have, for example, some little crossings everywhere in Europe or somewhere in the world with autonomous ships if we had them, because we wouldn't pose any risk to anybody. It was just loading, unloading, disinfecting, and you have a cargo. but we didn't take that discussion as far as possible at the moment. So I believe now the situation would push us to take that discussion faster than we thought in the past. The third point that I want to keep in mind is not only the people that work paraphilia with the shipping industry. Don't forget that shipping itself is business to business. But I want to go back to the previous argument that I made, that it is a globalized industry. It will continue to be a globalized industry even after we come out from coronavirus epidemic. But we need to make sure that it works at the moment. Because what I see, it's a little bit scary that if we continue like that, might be a few months' time we don't have any ships moving. And I don't get any positive reactions to that.
True, very true. Actually, following up from what Andreas is just mentioning on what we should be embracing more in going forward, what pointers would you, if there was one thing that we should be taking from the current situation and applying it into our practices once we are able to go back to the norm, or if you believe we will ever go back to the norm, what would you say should that one thing be?
From my point of view, because I write quite a lot, I cover a lot to do with the way that the shipping industry is maneuvering towards that decarbonisation goal. The speed with which we've got every single government around the world responding to this pandemic, and yet it's taken them so long to respond to the issues of climate change. That difference in approach, surely that is what we've done, how we've responded to this pandemic. Surely we can learn from that and start responding a little faster to the challenges of climate change. So we can learn from this pandemic, from our response to it. We can learn whether we've made the right or wrong decisions as we go on. The economists and the scientists can work together to come up with an outcome, I suppose. But maybe we can then take that learning and very quickly apply it to how we look at any other global challenges that we've got in society.
Great point. Anna?
Well, I think this challenge has, from my personal point of view, I think it has highlighted and brought to the surface of every individual's personal life what our biggest fears are, what our biggest insecurities are, what our limitations are, what our abilities. And I think also talking from the point of view of a company owner, of an employer, it has been a very valuable exercise to actually see, have I been prepared enough for something like this? Or I remember I was dreading the idea of not being able to go to the office for longer than a week or 10 days. And here I am now, away from the office 5 weeks. And in fact, nobody's in the office and we can still do it. I think we've all learned to focus on what is important. I think from my own personal experience, we will reduce our micromanaging. We've all had to learn how to rely on each other without breathing down their neck. And my hope is that we will all come out a bit more humble and realize how small we are in the bigger scheme of things. And it only takes one virus to shut the whole world down and to kill thousands of people. And I agree with Craig, maybe if this lesson we don't forget for once, because as a human race, we do forget. We keep some memories and then we just forget them and we think, yeah, we've passed that, it's not gonna happen again. It may not be the same thing, but it will be something else eventually. So hopefully we learned our lessons and hopefully we will be better prepared for whenever the next time is or for whatever the circumstances are.
Andrea?
If you let me here, I would say is that if we believe in the philosophy, the past does not exist, the future does not exist, but only the present exists. I think we all mentioned 1 or 2 points each, what actually this present is telling us. Decisions are taken faster. I think it was Dorothea who said that. We also said that we're learning how to work remotely. And we also are, and Alfredo said, and I worked with Alfredo 2 years ago, and we used to have all these conferences twice or 3 times a day with 5, 6 people, and it was just dry business arguments. No smiling, no a joke. While now we see that this thing is not the norm anymore. People are coming into these conference meetings, they have more smiles. So at the end of the day, if from the present, what I will keep to become the new president in the future, it would be what Anna said. We're gonna come out humble, and hopefully we will remember, because I don't think anyone of us remembered the Spanish flu, or even the Hong Kong flu, which was only 1960 something. So we need to remember, because if we don't remember what happened, another virus might appear, and again, we're gonna start looking ourselves into shadowing and going to social distancing. But work-wise, I think another thing that we'll obviously remember is that we have to be connected at all times. Whether that means connectivity through technology or connection with other means, we need to be connected at all times. That will remain, and that will become the basic argument immediately after this epidemic for me.
Alfredo?
Yeah, I would, obviously, I share everything that was said. I think we will come, we'll come out of this probably more humble, more human. That's for sure. I think there's 2 things. I think we, at least maybe I'm over extrapolating the experience in my country, but I think we haven't had a long history of very good politicians and regulators from a long time. I think it's not a problem just in Spain, but I think in situations like this, you realize that they do matter. That maybe on a given situation, the business, the country goes on, and if they're not very good, you still get by and you find your way around it. And suddenly something like this hits you, and all of these problems that you could see in the public sector, they become you suddenly have it in front of them, and they're costing lives probably. They're costing a lot of money because of wrong decisions being made, because it puts everything under a test, and I'm not so sure that we're passing the test. I think when it comes to the cruise industry, I think a problem that the cruise industry has had for a long time has been a reputational problem. I think a very unfair, in my opinion, reputational problem, which comes from the lack of understanding in most of the countries, and perhaps the countries where you're based, maybe they're probably an exception, but lack of understanding what shipping is about. How important it is, how different, the different rules and regulations, the different players. Those things that are probably we take for granted because we work in an industry where we work are very far away from the common citizen or resident in most countries in the world. And I think as a consequence of all that, I think one of the things that the cruise industry has come to realize is that, and it's my personal opinion, is that we have very few friends, not enough friends in general. I think, for example, it's really surprising for me, what sometimes media has reported, or the focus on certain areas, and the lack of people ready to stand by and stand up, to say this is not right. And this is something that's been ongoing for a long time. The industry could get by because at the end of the day, there were all things that could compensate for it. But you realize that once the situation becomes more difficult, if people don't understand what you're doing, they don't understand why it's good. And if they're open to misperceptions, you're very vulnerable. And I think that's something that is happening. I think even to an extent to shipping, in general, I think we all understand how important shipping is to keep the economies of the world running. I think people who are educated on the subject too, but many people from many city ports, or they might not even be aware of how important it is to their daily life that those ports or that shipping activity is ongoing. And I think it's a big problem for the industry in general. And hopefully this will make us realize that we have to do better in this area.
I think actually this is a very important fact that you mentioned, because it's a recurring topic in every situation, that the image of shipping and the image of cruising is not treated in the best way. I mean, in world counters about the coronavirus, you had all the countries, and then you also had the Diamond Princess. So bad reputation always seems to be stronger and creating an image of how vital this industry is. Dorothea, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think that obviously I will echo what everybody has already said in terms of, you know, the reflection points of all of this and learning on a personal level. I think on a practical level, from a business perspective, we're all going to come out more organized, more efficient, and more connected internally and externally. I wanted to also mention that, you know, all of the ships and the cruise liners that are suffering from outbreaks and passengers and crew that need to be repatriated. When we hear, I read the news and I see what they say, and we're managing a major one as well right now. And they say, oh, you know, when the leaders go out and they talk about how the State Department or the Foreign Ministry have arranged for their citizens to come home. No, the P&I clubs have arranged for their citizens to go home. Okay, I just want everybody to realize that. Definitely the State Departments and the governments are facilitating and ensuring that travel restrictions are lifted for us to be able to do that. But it is the P&I clubs with the ship owners that are getting that done. And I think that's important for people to realize and to know. And then the last thing I wanted to say was that perhaps this whole experience maybe, just maybe, might teach us to have a little bit more empathy.
Andreas, or?
Oh, I just made my comments. Sorry.
You're fine. Okay, and Anna?
I just want to make a point that maybe it's irrelevant to where we've come now, but I think it's important we are talking about the maritime industry, because you've invited me here in my insurance capacity. When we're talking about who's going to pay the bill and who is going to, where is the financial impact going to be? As far as insurance is concerned, P&I is purely shipping, obviously. But when it comes to the hull market, the impact is not really the biggest impact. The biggest hit is not going to come from claims relating to marine claims that are the direct effect of COVID. It's going to come from non-marine claims such as event cancellation, business interruption, liability claims, maybe credit line, business, because the underwriters and the insurers who write marine business, with the exception of a few who do just marine, the rest of them, taking Lloyd's, for example, or the big insurance companies, they do all sorts of lines of business. And if they're hit in one line of business, big time, it's obviously going to affect their whole portfolio, and it's obviously going to affect their financial results. And that is then going to have an effect on the shipping industry, because if a company is making losses and is going to have to raise its premiums, or hopefully, touch wood, we're not going to lose more markets than we already have in the last year and a half, because the insurance market, the marine insurance market, has been, going through a very challenging time. We've lost a lot of markets. So hopefully we're not going to lose more as a result of this. Mm-hmm. So it's not just what is affecting us directly. It's all the other areas and industries that have been affected that are going to have, we're going to see the consequence of, not now, but like next year maybe, or maybe 2 years down the line. And it's the same way in, like, yes, we're sitting here, Dorothea, oh God, sorry, Dorothea. Dorothea just said, we have our jobs, some people don't. The thing is, we have our jobs, we have our salary coming in, we have our existing business. But the fact that business development people like me, like Andreas, like Dorothea, like other people who've been sitting, we're going to spend the biggest part of 2020 sitting at home, not developing business. Now that is not going to hit us this year. That is going to hit us next year. So when governments are taking into consideration measures, they should also take into consideration the businesses that are going to be affected financially because they've been idle this year, as opposed to, you know, the immediate ones, for instance, tourism, the hotel industry, etc.
But we see, I cannot trust on this one, unless talking about the domino effect, that it would have like an avalanche, let's say 2 years from now, but also we have also enacted the butterfly effect. Something that happens in Japan has a tremendous effect in Cyprus. And we have done that because, for example, if we don't think carefully what we do with passenger rights, for example, or the packaging, package travel issues, and we go all compensate, maybe nobody's going to go on a cruise next year, maybe nobody's going to go on a holiday next year. And therefore, again, we have another effect. And all these things, I don't think we have thought of them at the moment, but we need to think of them very quickly. We go back to square one at the end of the day, but I think the collateral effect will be more detrimental to us rather than the direct effect that we're hitting us right now.
True. I think we've raised some very important factors, and before we go on to, you know, closing the show slowly, if there's anything you would like to add from each other's discussions, feel free to do so. I mean, we're here to exchange opinions. So anything else you want to include in this discussion?
One comment on what Alfredo was saying about the media response to what's going on with the cruise ships, which as a media person, as a journalist, but not a general journalist, though, I must say. I think Alfredo's right, and I think there is a lot of misconceptions in the general media. I've got to clarify there, in the general media about what's going on. But I'm also alarmed when I see conflicting stories about what's going on within the cruise industry. So there are stories about how a ship's captain in Australia could be charged because the crew were allowed off of the ship when it berthed. And then there's equally damning stories about ships having crews and passengers on board still. There seems to be this conflicting story. So I think Alfredo's right. I think it's the cruise industry, while it tends to be the very visible aspect of the shipping industry in general, because it is the part of the industry that is business to consumer. And therefore, it comes under a lot of direct, but somewhat misleading attacks.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I would not say that everything has always been done right. I mean, it's always... I think this is normal that there might be misconceptions, but there, especially, and we're very visible, and you know, fortunately, sometimes we get a lot of media attention for the good stories. Perhaps we should not be so upset when it's for the not so good stories. I think what I general, it's more a question of my comment was more about educating everybody, and I'm not blaming necessarily the media. Don't get me wrong. I think we are at fault, and when I say we, I mean general shipping, because I frequently think that, you know, the negative exposure that the cruise industry gets, sometimes it could be, you know, it could be extended to the global maritime industry and shipping. But we are not doing a good job at explaining, for example, how important, you know, how many crew members are working on board. Now that you were talking about crew, how important it is that they embark and disembark. You know, people are just not aware of the difficulties. And sometimes when it comes to the cruise industry, they may not know all the screening procedures that are done by the industry. And you know, many things I could name that, you know, they just you know, they just not being people do not understand, and I don't think we're doing a good enough job at explaining them, not necessarily, and then afterwards they can make up their minds whether we're doing a good job or not. But sometimes they frequently lack the basic understanding of what a ship is, what is the regulatory framework, what are the general economic forces that drive shipping and cruising in general, what's their cost structure, you know, very basic things that they probably know about the airline industry, just to give you another example. They might know about other industries, and they just don't have a clue of what, you know, cruise ship, cruise industries. That's my more, you know, my comment about.
And Dorothea?
Yeah, I think I mentioned already. I commented on this a little bit earlier in terms of, you know, the you know, the roles definitely of what we're doing in terms of the cruise industry. I think that it definitely has a bigger impact. We're having problems with not only cruise ships. I mean, we are handling one cruise matter right now, but we're handling situations with other ships, with bulkers. With one bulker in particular that had a death on board that had nothing to do with the COVID-19, and we were unable to get that person repatriated, that, you know, the deceased. So you can imagine the stress that causes for that family. You know, I'm glad though that, like we said earlier, the industry is, you know, putting the plight of the seafarer on the forefront. Yeah, I think that, you know, we just have to keep going forward and handling it the way that we are. I mean, like I said, the P&I clubs are taking a very active role. We'll continue to do that. But there has to be a little bit more cooperation also from the ports and from the authorities to help us in terms of getting seafarers in and out. And I think we said it earlier as well. It's not enough just to get one group of seafarers home. You have to be able to get the next ones on board, right? Anna and I know of another case where in the cruise industry, especially, it's going to be especially hit. Let's be real. They were getting ready for the season. They canceled the season. That's it. They had to, you know, they had to lay up the ships. And most of our members now, all the cruise ships are laid up. That's it. They've lost the season. They will have no income this year. One of them, though, was getting prepared, had 52 crew on board, and then this happened, and now can't get them home. So they are now trapped on that ship, and that's something that we have to deal with. Yeah, like I said earlier, and I think Andreas said this as well, there has to be a conversation about what's happened tomorrow. There's no conversation happening about what are we going to do tomorrow? And this cuts across all sectors, all levels, all industry.
Very true. I think because the situation came on kind of quickly, and there was a shift from not doing enough or not taking it seriously enough to panicking. I think now that things have started to, in a way, take their course, that the next step forward should be exactly that, putting down a plan on how we're going to take this onwards and in the long term, and the domino effect that it will have, and everything that has been mentioned, even the media presence, which keeps on being a recurring topic whenever something happens.
I think, Gina, I think, you know, to continue on what Dorothea was saying and what you were saying, I think I totally agree that the private sector should be, we are ready to make plans as to what's going to happen. It's our job. But it's almost impossible to make a plan if you don't know what's going to be the regulatory framework you're going to be working on. Nobody knows.
Right, exactly.
I mean, I had this same conversation today with some regulators and some people here in Spain to say, well, I can understand that because of the health crisis, you don't know whether, you know, the situation will be, when is it going to happen? But would you please be able to tell me when are you going to open up ports again for the cruise industry, and how that will be done? And of course, you cannot tell. I can understand that today you cannot tell me whether this will happen in 1 week, in 1 month, or in 3 months. But please let me know what the scenario is, and if I know the scenario, I can make my own plan. But if I have no regulatory scenario whatsoever, how can I make a plan? I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know when it's going to happen. So I can understand not exactly knowing when it's going to happen, because nobody knows when the health situation is going to improve. But at least give me a picture of what life is going to look like from a regulatory framework afterwards. And I don't think, I don't know, I don't see them busy working on that. Or I mean, I see a lot of people in the private sector very worried about what's going to happen. I don't see people in the public sector, you know, or at least I don't see the same, you know.
Exactly. That was exactly my point.
5 weeks ago, I was in a panel discussion on a round table, and the thing I said 5 weeks ago, the question was how the virus will affect the industry, and I said the worst case scenario for the shipping industry is the unpredictability of national regulations that they appear out of the blue, because what the global framework will be more or less we know, but now we are in that situation that national regulations are coming on the forefront, and they are predictable what those national regulations would be. And Alfredo is absolutely right. If I don't know those national regulations well in advance, I cannot plan any business. I will hit my head on the wall. A good example, a cruise ship that has to have a port and a destination. If they don't know what is the regulation applying on A and B and C, how are they going to operate an itinerary? How are they going to have short excursions and so on? So yeah, the unpredictability, it's really not something we would like to have.
Yeah.
Exactly, because they're not able to plan ahead. And actually, Alfredo, the point that you're mentioning with the ports, ideally we should have had somebody from the port side on this panel, because it's just a chaotic situation. I mean, in dealing with the situation, just denying access to cruise ships and denying access to transferring seafarers on and off the ship has just been completely unprecedented, and maybe legal-wise there might even be a debate on how
Gina, to be on the fair side here, I don't think that is the ports imposing the restriction. It's by other authorities of the state, which might not even know what was the precautions that a cruise ship took before board the passengers. Mm-hmm. They did all the tests, for example, whatever, but that authority doesn't know, but imposes the restriction on the port, and the port becomes paralyzed.
Let me share a personal experience in this. The Spanish ports were shut. There was an announcement on March 12th to be implemented in the evening of March 12th, to be implemented on March 14th. So there was less than 48 hours notice, banning all cruise ships from going into Spanish ports whatsoever, regardless of where they came from. 6 days before, so on March 6th, I had a meeting with authorities, amongst which there was senior representation from the health ministry. I asked specifically what were going to be the protocols that would apply on a ship if one possible case or one confirmed case of COVID were to happen on a cruise ship. The answer was, well, we're working on a protocol. We're working on something. No feeling whatsoever of urgency. And 6 days after, you take the unprecedented decision with thousands of people on board ships to say we're going to shut down the ports of one of the main countries in Western Europe in terms of the cruise industry, and just leave them stranded. And I'm talking about the passengers. I'm talking about the tourists. Now, what about the crew? I mean, the seafarers. They've been left stranded and it was a blanket decision. It was not we will do it on this port or this port because we have a situation on that city. It was not we will do it for this nationality or for ships coming from this country. It was a blanket decision in only 6 days from, the feeling of we have the situation under control. Yes, we're working on the protocol, but no real sense of urgency we're shutting down. This is what I'm talking about. We're talking about, having situations, very real situations of a cruise ship that is requesting to be laid up in a Spanish port with maybe 1,000 crew members on board. And the authorities coming back, the regulation right now is they can only come with minimum safe money. According to them, for a ship of 1,000 crew members, minimum safe money can be 40 people. So what do you do with the remaining 960? Do you dump them at sea? If everybody takes the same approach, and this is a global approach, crew members will not be able to disembark, let alone embark again, not even disembark. And regardless of whether there's any case of coronavirus on board or there's any potential. So that's the kind of unplanned, very chaotic decision making, not really applying any common sense and with no explanation of why this decision was made, that I'm afraid it's going to go on, and it's making this crisis worse than it would have to be.
Well, we can only, hope that the situation will start to become clearer soon, and the framework will be coming into place, because unfortunately, as we've all kind of stressing, Andreas, thanks for correcting me, indeed not the port as such, but generally the authorities behind it. There's no clear understanding of the situation, it's just chaotic. As we're slowly running out of time, the final question that I would like to ask, which Alfredo has already shared the story, but if there's anything you would want to add, go ahead. I would say we've discussed so many things on the impact generally, and there's really a lot of concerns and a lot of thoughts on going forward of the situation, various debates that are ongoing. But personally, what would you say has struck you as the most fascinating or the most unexpected aspect of this whole situation? If you could each briefly just, Greg, if you want to start, just give a pointer before we close the show. What do you mean in terms of the most unexpected? Unexpected, or what made the greatest impact of all on you?
So far, well, we've touched on it, what Anna and Dorothea were implying earlier, and that is the ease with which we've turned towards home working. Mm-hmm. And how we found this level of digital connectivity in our lives suitable for our lifestyles to a large extent. I mean, in my case, I've been working from home long before this. I've got a home office, so there's nothing new for me from working from home. But my partner's now permanently working from home with me. I've got company at lunchtime now. So there are sort of the ease with which I'm finding the level of connectivity with people through video conferencing, through social media, etc. is increased, and I think there's a level of I don't know whether it was Anna or Dorothea that said that there is a level of trust that's going on about this as well. So we're having to rely on each other, we're having to trust each other, we're communicating with each other a lot better. And I think that is going to have a long-term impact on how we communicate. As we come out of this crisis, I think we're going to start finding that we started to lean on these technologies, we've lent on this digitalization tools, etc. And we're going to find that now, okay, in our hour of need, we found that we could use them. I've seen a number of class societies, for example, a number of technology companies promoting their digital wares. And I'm sure okay, you could be cynical and say that it's just a very cynical marketing ploy for them to use this hour of need and say, look, we're here with our digital tools. But this is the time where we can actually use these digital tools and we can actually find that we can rely on them. And as we come out of this crisis, begin to really encourage and see this digitalization both in our social lives and in the maritime and shipping industry.
Great. And Anna?
Well, I think for me, the most amazing thing was I never really expected that the day would come that I would say, thank God for technology. I mean, I started my career in 1987 at Lloyd's, and in those days we only had computers with the black screen with the green typing WordPerfect, whatever it was, and it was going or on the telex, and everything was done face to face, as I explained. And I'm thinking, my God, what if something like this had happened then? We would have ships uninsured, we would have seafarers stranded without assistance anywhere. I mean, it would have been a chaos. So thank God for technology. I am now ready to embrace you.
Thank God for technology, indeed. Alfredo?
Well, I guess to be totally honest, I think the thing that has impacted me the most, I had unfortunately, I lost a very dear colleague who works in, I think Andreas knew him, Emiliano Gonzalez from MSC. He passed away because of this last week. So I guess in a very personal way, it's losing somebody that you work with makes you realize, that how important it is, the people you work with, that this is not something, I mean, since this has been ongoing in Spain for over a month, you look at the daily statistics, so many people die, the curve is going down, fewer people are dying. And until it impacts you directly, you realize that behind those numbers, there's actually people, there's humans, there's stories. So I guess that's to me, on a personal level, that's definitely what I think, and I hope it's the last one amongst the people that I know, that I love, that will be impacted by this. So that's definitely my main story, if I may say so. I think on a more of a business level, I've been, and I think Dorothea was mentioning that about the cruise industry and about the role that P&I clubs are playing in this. I have been surprised. I knew this already, but it's been another confirmation of how much the cruise industry has done to take care of, as far as I can see, to take care of their guests. I think I see efforts from ships which are even there's one ship which is coming as far away as from the Far East, and the cruise was supposed to finish in Venice, so it's crossing the Suez Canal now, or a few days ago, and the company, in order to guarantee that the Spanish guest will make it home safely, is going to divert the ship all the way from Venice into Spain. Imagine what this is going to cost, and just for a few, a couple of hundred passengers out of a few thousand guests. So that's I'm really proud of what the industry has been doing in general. There may have been some mistakes, but I think they're going to great lengths to protect the guests and the people, and I think also the crew members.
True. Dorothea?
Yeah, I think I definitely have a new appreciation, a new special appreciation for health professionals. Listening to the accounts of my brother in New York, it's just, we know what they do is special, but I think it's definitely come to the forefront right now and how valuable they are. From a business perspective, the one thing that surprised me is that I never imagined that I would work more than I was working already. So that was definitely a surprise for me. What?
Traveling.
Yeah, without traveling. Oh my gosh, and I'm still tired. So that's one thing that was remarkable. But definitely the other thing I didn't expect, though, was to be so much more connected. Like I said earlier, so much more connected within my company, outside of my company, and also on a personal level with all of my family all over the world. So I'm definitely working harder, but much more connected.
Good to know. And Andreas?
On a personal level, on a personal level, I would say I was surprised what people had in mind. What is the most vital thing in their life? When you go to the supermarket and you find certain things missing, you go, honestly, is that what you're buying all this week? That was really a shock for me, especially. But on the industry-wise, I think we as industry, we're doing as much as we can, and we're doing our best. And thank to all the seafarers for keeping the ships running, and for all those that they make the shipping industry working. But and we would try to keep them all connected. But I agree that technology from now on will not be considered what you call it, a luxury or an accessory. It will consider a necessity. And connectivity will be considered a necessity, because when we were in Cyprus, I would strongly touch that for Cyprus. A few months ago, we were discussing connectivity of the island because of the lack of flights, commercial flights. And suddenly one of the panelists mentioned, how about connectivity in relation to what we have right now? And half of the audience was lost. I think that discussion will not go lost again. Connectivity is not anymore, this kind of connectivity is not anymore a luxury. It will be necessity, and we will see it booming. And Sana said, thanks God that we were not living in the Spanish flu, because how the hell we're going to connect that? But now we can do that, whether it's a mobile phone. And don't forget, these mobile phones, they have a technology better than the one that went to the moon. So they can do magic if we want to.
I think, and in that, we've come to the end of today's show, and some very valid points have been made, both positive notes, negative, lessons learned for sure in going forward. Connectivity obviously being a very recurrent topic, the important roles of particular sectors of this industry. And I think also from a personal level, how we now connecting and are more unified is probably one of the most positive outcomes. But generally, I think we have managed to highlight how the infrastructure is changing. And let's just wait and see how it's going to evolve, and maybe have this panel again in a few months and see what steps are being taken. Anything else from your side, guys, that you would like to quickly add before we close today's show?
Thank you, Gina, for having this idea and for organizing it. And it's definitely given us back something that I think we all missed.
I think also, judging from the comments, that people were very happy with it, but we have to thank Andreas, of course, for insisting on making it more international. And I think that's very well. Thank you very much, guys, for joining this virtual panel. I hope it's the beginning of many, and that we've shared some important things for consideration for the industry. Greg, Anna, Andreas, Alfredo, Dorothea, thanks again. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's hope that this chaos will be coming to a closing soon. That was it from It's All About Shipping and Gina Panayiotou. And stay tuned for more. Thank you. Bye.
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 Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Night.